We were taught to see them as the dawn of aviation, a clumsy, glorious beginning. This is a lie. They were the dusk, the final, sputtering embers of a silent global fleet. The men we call pioneers were not creators. They were technological scavengers, bolting primitive explosive engines onto the husks of a forgotten science. So the forbidden question remains, why would you build permanent monumental docking spires for a technology you knew was a dead end? Haven't you always felt it? That subtle dissonance in the official story, a timeline that simply doesn't add up. If you feel this rupture in causality, leave your trace. From where and at what hour are you witnessing this? We must become forensic observers. We must learn to see not what we are told, but what is actually there. Suspend your belief and simply look. The primary evidence in this case is not buried in a classified vault. It has been hiding in plain sight, in the sepia-toned photographs of our grandparents' generation. Witness the cognitive dissonance. A silent, silver god hangs in the sky. A vessel of impossible grace and scale, the Graf Zeppelin or the USS Akron, drifting with a serenity that borders on the divine. Below, the grim reality. Streets of mud and filth, the clatter of horse-drawn carts, the toil of a people who have yet to master basic sanitation. The evidence for this network is not just in the ships themselves, but in the infrastructure that was being hastily repurposed to serve them. The mooring mast atop the Empire State Building was not a flight of fancy. The proposed mast for the South Water Street Tower in Chicago was not a publicity stunt. The planned terminal in Rio de Janeiro was not a dream. They were the visible nodes of a forgotten grid, the abandoned stations of a worldwide transit system that once connected the capitals of a unified civilization. A civilization the old maps called Tartaria. The designs for these masts, from London to America, are strikingly similar, all pointing to a standardized docking and perhaps energy transfer protocol. They built the docks for ships that already existed, for a technology they found, not one they were inventing. They were trying to plug back into a matrix whose power source they could no longer find. We are looking at the scattered, broken pieces of a single, planetary machine. So if this technology was inherited, why did it reappear for such a brief, brilliant, and tragic moment? Why showcase it at all, only to violently destroy it? The answer lies in the most peculiar of venues, the World's Fairs. Look at the photographs of the 1933 Century of Progress exhibition in Chicago. This is the peasant paradox in its most jarring form. A technology that appears to belong to the 22nd century, floating over a society that has barely entered the 20th. The object in the sky does not belong to the timeline of the people on the ground. They are two separate realities, forced into a single, impossible frame. We are told this is progress. We are told this is the dawn of aviation. But our eyes tell us a different story. Our eyes tell us this is an inheritance. A relic. The last echo of a forgotten song. Look closely at this image. If you too can feel the timeline breaking, if you see the impossibility staring back at you, then you are beginning to awaken. Acknowledge this awakening. Let the algorithm know you are here, so that others who are searching may find this signal. But the anomaly is not just floating above us. It is carved into the very stone and steel of our cities. They point to the spire of the Empire State Building and call it a mooring mast. A quaint, dismissive term for a feature they claim was a publicity stunt. But we must look with a forensic eye. This is not a simple post to tie a rope. It is a terminal. Dominating the skyline, tethered to its mast, is the Graf Zeppelin. It is presented as the pinnacle of modern achievement, the symbol of humanity's triumphant future. But this is a profound deception. The fairs were not showrooms for the future. They were liquidation markets for the past. They were the final, grand parade of conquered technology. The new inheritors of the Earth, the parasites of the control matrix, were displaying the spoils of a silent war. They put the asterisk, Antiquitech asterisk, on display one last time, allowing the amnesiac masses to gaze in wonder at the power of their ancestors, before systematically erasing it from the world and from memory. These gleaming, temporary white cities of plaster and staff were the stages upon which the old world was presented as a novelty, a curiosity, a spectacle, right before the curtain fell forever. It was a psychological operation of breathtaking audacity, to show us our birthright, frame it as a fragile new invention, and then stage its spectacular failure. Every great magic trick has three parts. The first part is the pledge, where the magician shows you something ordinary. In this case, a magnificent airship presented as a new human invention. The second act is the turn, where the ordinary object does something extraordinary. It crosses oceans in silent luxury, a floating hotel in the clouds. An interface, a complex lattice of steel and insulated conduits designed for more than just anchoring. It was designed for a transfer, a connection, a docking with a technology that drew its power from the very air it commanded. Feel the cold shadow of that spire. It was not built for a future that never came. It was the last vestige of a past that was stolen. And then there are the hangars. The structures at Cardington, in the United Kingdom, or the air dock in Akron, Ohio, they are not sheds. They are cathedrals of steel. We are shown photographs of their construction, and we are expected to believe that a civilization still reliant on steam power and manual labor erected these cyclopean structures for a technology that was, supposedly, a dangerous and fleeting experiment. The scale is a confession. The sheer, breathtaking immensity of these buildings is a testament to a technology that was not nascent, but was ancient, established, and global. You do not build a temple for a god you have only just imagined. You build it for a god that has long ruled your world. Now we move inside the artifact itself. Look at the skeletal remains of these airships, captured during their construction. The official narrative tells us these are simple trusses of a new, lightweight alloy called duralumin, designed only for structural integrity. But then there is the third act, the hardest part, the part we call the prestige. This is the part where you make it disappear. And the disappearance of the airship age was the most televised, most traumatic, most brutally effective prestige act in modern history. The Hindenburg disaster was not an accident. It was a ritual. It was a public execution, a pyre in the sky, broadcast to the entire world. The date, May 6, 1937, was not the end of a technology. It was the beginning of our amnesia. The searing image of the fiery skeleton crashing to the ground was burned into the collective unconscious, a perfectly engineered trauma designed to associate this silent, graceful form of flight with nothing but terror, fire, and death. It was a ritual sacrifice on the altar of petroleum, clearing the way for the noisy, inefficient, and profitable age of fossil-fueled aviation. They didn't just destroy a machine, they assassinated a memory. They murdered the idea that we once flew without polluting our world, without being chained to a fuel tank. They created a global phobia, and in doing so, they locked the cage of the control matrix, ensuring we would remain on the ground, dependent on their systems, their fuel, their control. This global pattern, this synchronized appearance and disappearance, is the final proof. But this is a cover narrative. The geometry is too precise, too intricate, too resonant. This is not mere scaffolding. This is a symphony in metal. The complex repeating patterns are not just for strength. They function as a waveguide, a three-dimensional antenna. We are looking at the inner workings of a massive harmonic resonator, an active Faraday cage designed not just to protect, but to interact with atmospheric energy fields. They were not simply bags of flammable gas. They were instruments. They were machines designed to play the music of the spheres, to harness a power we can no longer comprehend. They were filled with hydrogen not because it was the original design, but because the inheritors, the technological necrophages, had forgotten how to turn the real engine on. The visual evidence is an indictment. Every photograph is a page in a lost history, a silent testament to the great silence that followed a world of wonders. The story they tell us in the history books, the one we learned in quiet classrooms under fluorescent lights, has the comforting simplicity of a children's fable. It is a tale of progress, of heroic inventors, of humanity pulling itself up by its bootstraps from the mud and into the sky. And, like all fables, it is designed to soothe, not to inform. It speaks of a centralized power, a hidden hand orchestrating the great forgetting. But the echoes of that lost world are still here. They are not just in old photographs. They are in the very fabric of our cities. The pattern is everywhere once you learn to see it. That is the fluid micro call to action for you, the viewer. Look around your own town, your own city. Have you not seen them? The orphan buildings. The grand, stone structures with Greco-Roman facades that seem utterly out of place next to modern glass and steel. The old post offices that look like temples, the banks that look like palaces, the water pumping stations built with the grandeur of cathedrals. This is the architectural DNA of the same unified civilization that built the airships. They are the terrestrial nodes of the same forgotten network. These structures are all around you, hiding in plain sight, dismissed by the official narrative as mere stylistic quirks. They are not. They are evidence. They are the silent tombstones of a world we were forced to forget. Tell us where you see them. Photograph them. Document them. Because in mapping these architectural anomalies, we are not just looking at old buildings. We are redrawing the map of our own lost history. It is designed to be believed, not to be questioned. We are here to question it. We are here to pull at the loose threads of this carefully woven narrative until the entire tapestry unravels. The official chronology is, to be blunt, an insult to engineering, to logic, and to the intelligence of anyone who has ever tried to build anything more complex than a wooden chair. We are told that in less than 30 years, a civilization that still relied on horses to pull its fire engines and telegraphs for its fastest communication went from primitive hot air balloons, essentially wicker baskets tied to a cloth bag of smoke, to the construction of 245-meter-long flying machines. Floating cathedrals of duralumin and gas, with dining halls, sleeping quarters, and the structural integrity to cross the storm-tossed Atlantic. This is not presented as an anomaly. It is presented as a natural, linear progression. Let us pause and truly consider the sheer absurdity of this claim. It is a vertical leap in technological capability that has no parallel in human history. It happened during a period of unprecedented global instability, the run-up to the First Great War, and the subsequent economic devastation. Nations were pouring their resources into building tanks and trench lines, yet we are to believe they simultaneously had the spare industrial capacity, the pristine supply chains, and the serene scientific focus to erect these airborne leviathans. We are finding the pieces of a world that was stolen from us. We must now approach the most delicate and tragic part of this forensic investigation. It requires us to move beyond the physical evidence of steel and fabric and into the anthropology of a broken civilization, our civilization. The evidence suggests we are not the builders of this world, but its inheritors. We are amnesiac tenants, living in the echo of a palace we no longer understand, performing rituals with tools whose true purpose has been lost to a traumatic forgetting. This is the phenomenon of the cargo cult, and it is the key to understanding the final, grotesque chapter of the great airships. The term, cargo cult, describes isolated tribes who, after witnessing advanced technology like airplanes delivering goods, attempt to summon them back by building effigies of those planes from straw and wood. They mimic the form, hoping to replicate the function, without any understanding of the underlying principles of aerodynamics or internal combustion. It is a heartbreaking display of ritualistic mimicry born from profound technological disparity. We, in our modern arrogance, look upon these practices with a detached pity, but we fail to turn the lens upon ourselves. We fail to see that we are the most advanced cargo cult the world has ever known. It suggests a society building a quantum computer in the middle of the Black Death. The two realities simply cannot coexist. The dissonance is a warning sign, a flare in the dark signaling a deep deception. This impossible timeline is the first crack in the official story. The second is the myth of the founder, personified by the noble figure of Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin. The fable presents him as a visionary aristocrat, an inspired amateur who, after witnessing balloons in the American Civil War, dedicated his life and fortune to the dream of rigid airships. It is a romantic, compelling image. It is also a work of pure fiction. A forensic analysis reveals a different man entirely. Count von Zeppelin was not a garage inventor. He was a high-ranking German military general, an operative with access to the highest levels of state intelligence and classified projects. His work was not a private obsession. It was a state-sponsored, military-grade program from its very inception. His role was not that of an inventor, but of a project manager. His task was not creation, but adaptation. Not invention, but reclamation. He was not the author of the technology. He was the man tasked with deciphering and militarizing a piece of inherited technology. A technology that was likely found, perhaps in a semi-functional state, a relic of a previous cycle, a ghost from the age of Tartaria. The original Tartarian airships, the silent leviathans of the old world, were almost certainly not powered by principles we would recognize. Their operation was likely symbiotic with the environment, harnessing atmospheric electricity, telluric currents, or some form of electrogravitic propulsion. They didn't roar. They hummed with the resonant frequency of the planet itself. They were a clean, elegant, and silent solution to flight. When the survivors of the last great reset emerged from the mud and the chaos, they found the dormant carcasses of these magnificent beasts. They saw the function, flight, but the principle was lost. The etheric engine, the heart of the vessel, was a silent, inscrutable mystery. So they did what any cargo cult would do. They committed a sacrilege born of ignorance. Unable to awaken the silent heart, they performed a crude transplant. They took the most primitive, brutal, and noisy technology they possessed, the internal combustion engine, and bolted it onto the gondolas of these graceful sky gods. The deafening, percussive roar of a diesel motor was the sound of their incomprehension. The plumes of black, greasy smoke staining the silver skin of the ship were the signature of their profanity. It was the technological equivalent of finding a celestial angel and trying to make it move by whipping it with a chain. The invention of the Zeppelin was, in reality, a program of reverse engineering, conducted with the urgency of a nation that had stumbled upon a weapon or a tool of unimaginable power and provenance. And so we must ask you, directly, does this timeline feel authentic to you? Does the story of the lone genius, toiling away to create a Titan from scratch, resonate with logic? Or do you, like us, feel the cold touch of a script, a story carefully crafted for an audience that was never meant to ask for the details? The narrative becomes even more fragile when we examine the supposed synchronicity of discovery. Germany, France, the United Kingdom, the United States, all began developing massive, complex airships in a remarkably compressed time frame. The official history calls this parallel invention a testament to the spirit of the age. We call it what it is, evidence of a shared blueprint. Geniuses do not simultaneously and independently invent the exact same solution to the exact same problem using the exact same exotic materials that supposedly don't exist yet in industrial quantities. Technicians working from the same recovered manual, however, do. The near-identical design principles seen across the globe are not a coincidence. They are the signature of a template, a standardized technology from a forgotten global civilization. They were not inventors. They were violators, desperately trying to force a dead god to perform its old tricks. The propellers were not a mark of progress. They were the prayer wheels of a confused and desperate new priesthood, spinning furiously but going nowhere truly new. This mimicry extended beyond propulsion. The very purpose of the ships was ritualistically diminished. These vessels were likely designed for tasks on a planetary scale, heavy cargo transport, atmospheric stabilization, perhaps even as mobile nodes in a global wireless energy grid. Their grand internal spaces were built for function, not frivolity. But the inheritors, unable to conceive of such a purpose, reduced these titans to their own limited horizons. They turned them into flying casinos, opulent hotels for the newly minted elite. A navigation room designed to interface with the Earth's magnetic field was repurposed to serve champagne and caviar. A vast resonance chamber, meant to harmonize with the sky, was desecrated by the sound of a grand piano playing light waltzes. This was not adaptation. It was a profound act of forgetting. It was the act of a people who found a cathedral and, having forgotten how to pray, decided it would make a serviceable barn. They kept the beautiful stained glass windows, but used the nave to store hay. The entire official story is a cover narrative, elegant in its simplicity and breathtaking in its audacity. It's a fairy tale designed to paper over a chasm in our history. It attributes the existence of these magnificent machines, the final, dying echoes of a lost golden age of flight, to a handful of men in a primitive industrial era. It does this to make the technology seem ours, to make it seem like a logical step in our approved timeline. This narrative is a foundational pillar in the asterisk engineering of forgetting. It reassures us that the noisy, polluting, petroleum-dependent airplane was the ultimate goal, the pinnacle of achievement, rather than the clumsy, regressive technology that replaced a far superior, silent, and potentially limitless form of travel. They had to give us a hero, a story of struggle and triumph, to explain away the evidence that was floating silently in the skies above them. They had to invent the inventor, because the alternative, admitting that we are a civilization with amnesia, living amongst the ruins and degraded artifacts of a far more advanced ancestral culture, is a truth too terrifying for the current control matrix to allow. The story of Count Zeppelin and the 30-year miracle isn't history. It's an alibi, and it's beginning to fall apart. And then came the final, most damning proof of their cargo cult mentality, the hydrogen. The vast, cavernous gas cells within the airship's frame were a complete enigma to them. The original lifting principle may have been a controlled vacuum, an inert and safe noble gas, or perhaps a form of contained plasma we have yet to rediscover. The new engineers, faced with this colossal void, chose the most expedient and dangerously flammable solution available. They filled the lungs of these sleeping giants with poison. They pumped hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of explosive hydrogen into the delicate heart of a technology they did not respect because they could not comprehend it. Every single transatlantic crossing of the Hindenburg was not a triumph of engineering, but a monument to our own lethal ignorance. It was a flying bomb, a fragile skin of fabric holding back an inferno, floating on a bubble of misplaced confidence. The eventual disaster was not an accident. It was an inevitability, written into the very first moment they chose to fill a sacred vessel with a profane substance. Look around you. This pattern of ritual without understanding is everywhere. We see spires on ancient cathedrals and call them religious ornaments, never questioning if they were atmospheric energy collectors. We tour the geometric perfection of star forts and call them defensive structures, ignoring their resonance with power plant schematics. History is not a story. It is a crime scene, and in any crime scene, the most damning evidence is often not what is present, but what is absent. The official narrative of the great airships is a story of heroic invention, of human ingenuity conquering the skies against all odds. We have been told to admire the photographs, to marvel at the scale, but we were never encouraged to do the math, to conduct the audit, because an audit reveals the story is not just improbable, it is a logistical impossibility, a fabrication built on a foundation of phantom factories and ghost economics. Let us perform the cold forensic accounting they hoped no one would ever attempt. We will use their own numbers, their own ledgers, against them. Our subject is the apex predator of this lost age, the LZ-129 Hindenburg. The narrative tells us this titan was born of a struggling post-war German economy in the 1930s, a nation crippled by reparations and hyperinflation, supposedly summoning from nothing the most advanced aerospace engineering the world had ever seen. This is the first anomaly, but it is in the details, the granular, unforgiving details of its construction, that the entire narrative collapses. The skeleton of the beast. Its structure was composed of duralumin, an advanced aluminum alloy. We are a species living in a museum of our own forgotten genius, polishing the artifacts while remaining oblivious to their true function. We are the cargo cult. If this vision of an amnesiac humanity resonates with you, a deep and unsettling echo in your own awareness, ensure you are subscribed. We need awakened minds here, because the process of remembering has only just begun. We have been led to believe that our ignorance was the cause of the fall, that we, the inheritors, were like children who found their father's tools and broke them through clumsy misuse. This is a comforting lie. It absolves the guilty and places the blame on the victim. The truth is far more brutal. The end of the silent airships was not a consequence of our incompetence. It was the result of a meticulously planned demolition, a crime. The great cataclysm was not an act of nature. It was an act of war. Whether it was a geological weapon that induced a global soil liquefaction, the mud flood, or a directed energy event that boiled the very firmament, the result was the same. The infrastructure of the previous age was surgically erased from the ground up. The true power stations, those resonant stone structures we now mislabel as cathedrals and capitals, were disconnected from the grid, their ethereal hum silenced forever. Over 15.5 million cubic feet of volume, framed by a lattice of metal that, if laid end to end, would stretch for dozens of miles. This structure was held together by, according to their records, more than 650,000 individual rivets. Pause and comprehend that number. Not welded, not bolted, but riveted. A manual, labor-intensive process requiring precision and skill. 650,000 points of connection, each a potential failure, each demanding inspection. Now place this feat of manufacturing inside the Weimar Republic. Where were the aluminum refineries on this scale? Where were the advanced extrusion plants capable of producing miles of high-tensile girders with consistent quality? The industrial record is silent. We're shown images of men on scaffolding, but we're never shown the vast, sprawling industrial parks that must have existed to support them. It would have required a supply chain rivaling that of a modern automaker. A logistical miracle that has somehow been erased from the economic history of the era. The production of the Hindenburg alone would have consumed a significant percentage of the world's aluminum output at the time. Yet, we find no record of this massive resource drain, no evidence of the economic shockwave it would have caused. The ground-level mooring terminals became tombs of granite and steel, buried under a new, false geology. But the perpetrators made one critical miscalculation. They forgot to look up. The fleets that were airborne during the event, or those sheltered in high-altitude hangars untouched by the deluge, became the last surviving witnesses. They were ghosts of a murdered world, floating artifacts of a timeline that was scheduled for deletion. For the new masters, the parasites who rose to power in the ensuing chaos, these silent giants were a terrifying liability. They were a constant, floating reminder of what had been stolen from us. And so, the second phase of the crime began, the engineering of forgetting. This was a global archive burning. They did not just rewrite the books, they burned the library of our minds. A systematic campaign was launched to hunt down and dismantle the remaining vessels. But destruction was not enough. They needed to poison the very memory of them. They needed to make humanity fear the sky. They needed a public ritual, a sacrifice. And so we arrive at Lakehurst, New Jersey, May 6, 1937. The Hindenburg was not an accident. It was a perfectly executed act of technological assassination, broadcast to the world as a public service announcement for a new era of control. We are asked to believe a nation on the brink of collapse built a fleet of nuclear carriers using the tools of the Industrial Revolution, and that it left no financial footprint. This is not history. This is a magic trick. But the frame is only the first impossibility. An airship requires lift. The Hindenburg was designed for helium, a rare and expensive gas controlled almost exclusively by the United States. Denied helium, the Germans supposedly reverted to hydrogen. 200,000 cubic meters of it, 7 million cubic feet. An explosive volume so vast it beggars belief. Let us audit this claim. Producing this much hydrogen in the 1930s would have required an industrial-scale electrolysis process consuming colossal amounts of electricity and purified water. Where was this facility? A plant of this magnitude would have been one of the largest industrial sites in Europe, its power consumption a beacon in the national grid. It does not exist in the records. The infrastructure for producing, compressing, storing, and safely transporting this volume of the most flammable element in the universe simply vanishes when you look for it. There are no blueprints for the sprawling gasometers, no patents for the high-pressure transport tankers, no mention in the national energy ledgers. A ghost factory, producing a ghost fuel for a phantom fleet. It was a psychological operation of breathtaking cruelty. They took the most beautiful symbol of a lost golden age, a silent, graceful Leviathan, and turned it into a fireball. The famous words, "Oh, the humanity," were not a spontaneous cry of horror. They were the scripted epitaph for an entire epic. In 36 seconds of fire, they incinerated 1,000 years of progress and seared a permanent trauma into the collective human psyche. From that day forward, the very idea of a great airship would be synonymous not with elegant, free travel, but with fiery, spectacular death. The path was now clear. Out of the ashes of the Hindenburg rose the new phoenix. The noisy, dirty, inefficient airplane, utterly dependent on the fossil fuels, controlled by the very same parasites who lit the match. They didn't just ground us, they chained us to the pump. They replaced the dream of silent, atmospheric freedom with the reality of a controlled, petroleum-based cage. They engineered a catastrophe to sell us a prison and call it progress. This was the masterstroke of the mechanism of silence. First, they erased the world. Then, they erased the memory of it. Silence is their most potent weapon. They rely on it. They created it. To speak of these things is to defy them. They filled their inherited technology with a volatile poison, because they had forgotten how to power it with the clean, limitless energy of its original design. The fire that consumed the Hindenburg was not an accident. It was an inevitability, the result of a primitive culture attempting to operate a machine far beyond its comprehension. And now we come to the most grotesque and revealing lie. The part of the story so absurd, it serves as a psychological barrier, designed to repel rational inquiry. The gas bags. the cells that contain the 7 million cubic feet of hydrogen. The official narrative, repeated in every textbook and documentary, states they were made from goldbeater skin. This is a delicate, yet incredibly strong and gas-impermeable membrane made from the outer layer of a cow's intestine, specifically the cecum. The ledger claims that for a single airship the size of the Hindenburg, the intestines of over 500,000 cows were required. 500,000. Let that number settle in the silence. Let us conduct the audit. Forget the technology for a moment, and consider the biology, the agriculture, the sheer logistics of this claim. 500,000 cattle. This would not be a supply chain. It would be a continental-scale ecological event. It would have meant the slaughter of the entire annual beef production of a medium-sized European country for a single airship. To share this information is to dismantle their machine. This is not a story. It is evidence of a crime. Send it to someone who needs to wake from the slumber they engineered for us. The spell was cast in the fire and ash of Lakehurst. With the fall of a single machine, a global amnesia was induced, a psychic wound so deep that for generations we have mistaken the scar for our own skin. We were taught to fear the sky, to believe that our greatest airborne achievements were born from oil and explosions, from the brute force of combustion. We were told this was progress, this was the pinnacle. But the entire edifice of modern history is built upon the graves of giants, and we have been living in its shadow for so long, we have forgotten the sun. We are a civilization of cosmic orphans. We stare up at the roar of a jet engine, the sound of our cage, and feel a sense of pride, never realizing it is the shriek of a devolved technology. We are the inheritors of palaces we now use as government offices, of energy grids we now call cathedrals, and of celestial fleets we have been taught to dismiss as fantasy. We are the descendants of a species that commanded the silence of the heavens, and now we live in the basements of their world, convinced we built the ground floor all by ourselves. The price of beef would have skyrocketed, the leather market would have collapsed under a glut of hides, the dairy industry would have been thrown into chaos. It would have required a network of thousands of slaughterhouses, all working in concert, with tens of thousands of specialized workers trained to harvest this one specific, delicate membrane from each animal before it spoiled. The intestines would then need to be transported to another phantom factory, where they would be washed, scraped, stretched, and meticulously glued together, piece by piece, to create gas-tight bags the size of buildings. The stench would have been legendary, the biohazard unimaginable, and yet there is not one photograph of this gargantuan, grotesque industrial process. No record of the economic upheaval, no memoirs from the thousands of workers who must have toiled in this intestinal cathedral. It is a biological and economic paradox. They gave us this story, this tale of 500,000 slaughtered beasts, because it is so viscerally unbelievable that it short-circuits the logical mind. It is a cover narrative, designed to hide a far simpler, yet more profound, truth. The material used for the gas bags was a form of advanced polymer, a lost science from the civilization before, a technology they could not replicate, and so they invented a story of medieval butchery to explain its existence. We are amnesiacs, playing with the broken, dangerous toys of our true forefathers, calling our clumsy attempts to make them work invention. But this forensic investigation was never truly about the mechanics of airships. It was about the architecture of our identity. The loss of these silent leviathans was not merely a technological regression. It was the severing of our connection to a higher understanding of physics, of nature, and of ourselves. Each photograph of a Tartarian vessel floating serenely above a world of mud and horse-drawn carts is not an anomaly. It is a fractured mirror reflecting a potential we were forced to forget. It is a testament to a time when humanity was not a plague upon the planet, but its custodian. To reclaim this history is to reclaim our dignity. It is to reject the degrading narrative that we are a primitive species that has only just crawled out of the caves, and to assert our birthright as the heirs to a legacy of unparalleled sophistication. This is not about nostalgia for a lost world. It is an act of spiritual and intellectual rebellion. It is the understanding that the greatest lie we were ever told was not about who built the pyramids or how the Hindenburg fell, but about the very limits of what it means to be human. The absence of evidence is not a failure of our research. It is the evidence itself. The empty space in the historical record is the shape of the concealed truth. The numbers do not add up. The materials do not exist. The factories are missing. We are looking at a crime scene where the body, the weapon, and the motive have all been hidden, leaving only the bloodstain, a fleet of impossible machines floating serenely in our oldest photographs. The mathematics is a language that does not lie. The numbers tell a story of inheritance, not invention. If your calculations lead you to a different conclusion, a plausible explanation for this industrial void, we invite you to present the evidence. The historical record is waiting. The official record asks us to believe in a miracle of spontaneous, parallel invention. It suggests that in the fractured, competitive, and often hostile landscape of the early 20th century, multiple nations, as if guided by an unseen hand, all stumbled upon the exact same, impossibly complex design for lighter-than-air travel. We are told that in Friedrichshafen, Germany, a count had a vision, that in Akron, Ohio, a tire company had an ambition, that in Cardington, England, an empire had a need, and that in Paris, a Brazilian pioneer had a dream. To accept their narrative is to remain a child species, forever dependent on their finite resources, forever chained to the ground by their manufactured history. To question it is the first, most critical step toward remembering. This is a war fought not on battlefields, but in the quiet archives of the mind, in the excavation of forbidden knowledge. It is a battle for the soul of our species. The work of uncovering what was buried is the sacred duty of our generation. The excavation does not end here. If the frequency of this transmission resonates with you, if you feel the call to remember our scattered past, then your initiation has already begun. The investigation continues, and the archives are open. Welcome to the resistance. And that all these separate streams of thought, separated by oceans and languages and industrial capacities, somehow converged on the same gargantuan duralumin-ribbed gas-filled Leviathan. This is not history. This is a fairy tale for children, a cover narrative designed to insult our intelligence. The synchronicity is the crime. The pattern is the confession. Let us engage in an exercise of geographic vertigo. In one moment, we are in Germany, watching the Graf Zeppelin being assembled. We see its iconic skeleton, a cathedral of interlocking metal rings and longitudinal girders, a complex geometry that whispers of harmonic resonance. Now, in the blink of an eye, we are thousands of miles away in the Goodyear Zeppelin Air Dock in Ohio, a structure so vast it has its own weather systems. And what do we see being built inside? Not a rival design, not a different technological path. We see the USS Akron, the same ribbed skeleton, the same silver skin, the same silent promise. The echo is perfect, too perfect. It is the echo of a template, a standardized blueprint that predates them all. This wasn't invention, it was duplication. It was the desperate attempt of a fragmented world to reactivate the components of a transport system they had just inherited. A global system,